Secret Men's Business was really formed as a way for men to advocate self acceptance. On today's show, we have the epiphany of what Secret Men's Business is about, a man that actually went into the community and tried to make a change. Hi, this is Joey Buzzertle, and welcome to the Secret Men's Business podcast. On today's show, we're going to be speaking to Andrew Heslop, who is a good friend of mine and someone who's been out in the community and on radio and everywhere, really, to make change. Andrew, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Joe.
The change man. So you've done a lot, haven't you? Like I was looking at your resume and looking at your profile. I mean, I've known you for a while, and it's funny how you know someone, but you don't really know them until you go into their resume. So for the audience, do you want to maybe just give them a bit of a quick snapshot of what you do?
What I do? Well, now I'm a keynote speaker and an MC. And although I've not been very busy as a result of COVID, but I started my career as a journalist and a program maker in Adelaide in 1985 when I was still at secondary school. And I was absolutely besotted with the media. I'd done children's television in Adelaide when I was a toddler. And I just had this huge interest in it. And it's one of the things I really credit my late mother for doing, because she took this 4-year-old hyperactive toddler and put him in children's television. And when you take kids, certainly at that time, and put them in a big studio with big cameras and bright lights, kids used to shrink, whereas I was exactly the opposite. I certainly, performed for the camera as you had to do, but I didn't feel nervous about it. And I was never scared of the medium. And it's something that even today, when I go into a television studio, how old am I? 51. So, 47 years later, I still get that buzz and that sense of excitement of what is a really interesting industry for me, but obviously which has changed so much over the last 47 years.
Mm. I mean, you get it's interesting, isn't it? So obviously you feel at home there, and I mean, I was going to ask you the next question: what made you attracted? And it was your mother. That's lovely, and so there was a way for you to do that at a young age, which I think is good to grow up wanting that passion and that career. So, are there any things that you do get nervous about? Like, do you find that being in front of a camera, you're at home, but you might find other environments that cause you to have anxiety or nervousness?
Oh, look, in the last couple of years, I've developed anxiety and panic attacks. And from someone who's been so comfortable with being on live television or speaking on live radio, where I don't get nervous, where I don't get thrown by that situation at all. But as a result of a work-related injury, I couldn't get on a tram. The doors would open, I'd go to step on and I couldn't get on. I'd try to go to the supermarket and I couldn't go into the supermarket. I had to almost rush out. And I had to eventually say to the supermarket management, I'm not a shoplifter. I'm just being really challenged by the noise, the lights, all of this activity that's going on in the store. And so what I do is go and sit outside the supermarket, and to try and get on top of that anxiety or panic attack and to be able to go back. But I would never, ever have thought in my life that I would have been somebody who was dealing with panic attacks and anxiety. But these things happen at the strangest situations and for the strangest reasons.
I mean, it's really, thank you for sharing that, because I didn't know that. And it's interesting how, when I see clients, they normally run away. They normally stay at home. But what you did was you went and you spoke and you're dealing with it, which is good. And it's also, thank you again for saying that you weren't expecting it, because I think that's a really important message, because a lot of people do not understand it until they go through it. And our aim at Secret Men's Business is to get people aware, because I think we're living in a faster society, which is going to start causing anxiety. You know what I mean? Like everything now is fast. Do you have an idea of what triggered your anxiety? Was it the actual event or was it after?
It was a workplace issue which led to me developing panic and anxiety attacks. But my ex-husband, he also lived with panic and anxiety. And while I was enormously empathetic and watched how it came on all of a sudden, I didn't understand it until it began to happen to me. And I
Mm,
think that's a lot of the reason behind our interest in mental health. Certainly, we're much more comfortable talking about it and talking about different areas of mental health and how they impact us personally, our partner, our kids, a close relative, and even our friends. So we're much more open about it. And while I say that, which is great, we're not, I don't think, as good as understanding it. And when someone is going through a mental health episode, in my experience, what you need to do is be present.
mm,
Don't send a text. Don't send a Facebook message. Don't send a tweet. If you're really concerned about someone close to you and what they're going through, go and knock on the door,
yeah,
because what it needs is someone to break that cycle, because it's very easy to see Facebook messages or SMSs or tweets or whatever building up, but they're just building up. They're
yeah.
being, they're not being accessed. But when you're actually knocking on someone's door whom you care about to say, are you okay? That's what more of us should be doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. We were just talking about this yesterday because I was talking to some of my friends about my grief with losing my mother, and it was all everyone sent text messages. I didn't actually people didn't call me, and that's fine. But I thought let's talk about this. So, do you think that this is the way that we are becoming entrenched with? I mean, I even heard of people breaking up with their partners on text. So it's just
Yes.
so easy now. So while we're on the topic, so I was going to ask you later on. So in your industry, the media industry, how do they deal with mental health?
Well,
Are they
in
good?
I think some employers are better than others, and I think part of it is that we're all better at understanding what it is. But in my circumstance, where it was a workplace issue which caused or led to me developing it, that's a little bit more challenging. But I see certainly around lots of businesses, whether they be government or private sector, there's a lot of talk. We're here for you. There's an employee assistance line for you to call. There's free counselling available. Yes, we need to make more use of those tools and resources that are available to us. But I still think there are many people who are going through a mental health issue who are probably very nervous about disclosing that to their employer, because they don't want to be discriminated against, certainly. They don't want their job to be impacted. And they certainly don't want to be the butt of gossip and innuendo around the business. So it's really challenging. And it's something that, again, we all have to be better at understanding, and that's more than just ticking a box or putting a ribbon on your Facebook page or whatever to say I'm an advocate. That's great, but you need to take it a couple of steps further.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like, I work for an EPA and I speak to the employees about all the things that the business offers, but then they're all complaining about stress and too much work. And not, I mean, of course, we don't disclose, but it's like it's fair to do. Okay, you know what? We're going to give you double the work. So here's the number for for counselling, rather than looking at the workload, because people were getting so stressed that they were leaving. And it's the same thing with, say, Secret Men's business. Everyone was really excited at the beginning, and then COVID came to a standstill, sort of, and everyone went back to work. And we have to be aware of it all the time. And that's the thing. It's like if we don't talk about it, then we're going to be reactive rather than proactive, because it has to sort of change. Yeah, it has to change because men now are becoming more open to talking about it, which is a good thing.
I was one of the federal government's champions for the National Broadband Network when it was first announced. And one of the things that I learned going to roadshows and talking to communities across the country, certainly from the employer's perspective, was it's great to be able to do remote working. Yes, it'd be fantastic to have people working from home, but how can you trust them? How do you know they're actually going to be doing the work? How do you stop them skiving off? And so you fast forward to last year, when suddenly the globe fairly much has to work from home, and the productivity has changed. And I haven't seen any formal statistics around it, but I think it's actually been a very interesting circuit breaker, not just for the employer, but for the employee as well, because they can work around the hours and the activities that they need to deliver that suits them in their circumstance. Now, as we're recording this, in Victoria, certainly, the situation has changed again, and more people will be able to return to the office fairly soon. And certainly as the vaccination program rolls out, that's going to change things again. But I really would like to think that employers who have the ability to allow their staff to have more flexible working hours are going to be able to do that, because the productivity surely has to be there. And it also means that it's a better allocation of resources, particularly for those people who move up into middle and senior management, that you don't always have to be on the shop floor to be working at 100% capacity.
Yeah. Look, for me, it's all about the KPIs. They need to be realistic. I think there were people that had sale KPIs when we were in lockdown. Like, how can you? It's impossible to sell to someone when you would go out selling.
Yes.
So it's all about adapting. So on that note,
Can I just come back to you on that? I found it really interesting. In one of my first executive roles, I was one of the youngest executives in the organisation, and one of the more senior bosses just took me aside one day and said, "Are you sure that you're managing your team correctly?" And I just sort of looked at her and said, "Well, yes. What do you mean? Is there something you need to bring to my attention?" And she said, "Well, you seem very flexible with your people. They're not here at 9:15 and taking morning tea at 10:30 and lunch at 12:20 and afternoon tea at 3:15, and gone home by 4:45. I mean, they seem to be here, whenever they choose." And I said, "Well, that's right, because the work that we're doing, which involves often being on call and having to work after hours on weekends, I'm giving them the flexibility to decide when they want to finish the work that I've tasked them to do." And as a manager, I don't care if they come in at 7 o'clock in the morning and finish at 3, or come in at 10 and finish at 6, or whenever they choose to do it, as long as it's delivered by the deadlines. And if there are issues or problems, we've worked on that as we go along. And it was a really interesting learning for me as a relatively new executive, to understand some of the pitfalls and some of the blockages that did exist at the time in business, that let people work in a way that was not suitable to the employee but suited the organisation. And as I said just before, COVID has dramatically changed that.
Yeah, I mean, like in my industry, it's totally like we went online, and no one had done that before or thought of that, and like now I find it really hard to even consider going back to the office because for me it's the driving. Like, I don't feel as stressed because I have a 2.5 hour commute every day.
Mm-hmm.
So if I remove that, that's 2.5 hours of me going to the gym or something, and so I'm feeling better. And I work 2 days a week, and when I drive, it's like, oh my god, So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds throughout 2021.
Well, I have a friend who is a senior executive, and his business was divided into 4 groups, and they were all rostered to appear at the office on a particular days at work once that was allowed. And on one occasion, he turned up, and there was 2 other people in the office, and where is everyone else? Because all of the people in the green team should be on site today. And when they actually inquired of the team members, it was like, well, it wasn't convenient for me to come in today, so I'm going to work from home. So these are going to be some of the challenges for employers to manage, to say, okay, well, let's put in place a more formal structure for working from home activities. Yeah.
Yeah. So, if it's okay with you, I wanted to explore your experience in the media. And so, as a person that witnesses the media, I've noticed a big change with journalism. Like, one of the things that I've really noticed was, I remember a day when there used to be both sides of the story in a really good article or story. Now I sort of feel like everything is leaning towards the left or the right. And I know that a lot of that's got to do with, say, ownership and, I don't know, trends and fake news and all that. So I just wanted to get your head information around how you see it. How do you see journalism and news reporting as of today?
Well,
What's your
I know from the ABC's perspective, we try very hard to be balanced, to present both sides of the story when it is possible to present both sides of the story. And as a journalist, I mean, one of the parts of the journalism standard of ethics is that you do investigate and present both sides of the story. It's really integral to what you do. But marketing has changed the media has changed marketing, and commercial media is vastly different today than it was when I started in 1985. Part of that was there was always a natural bias from owners about how they believed their organisation should work. And it might be quite a surprise for many people to learn that the stable of newspapers, which were Fairfax and now are part of Nine Media, like in the 60s and 70s, they were actually very conservative. The Fairfax family really did run them as a personal fiefdom. And when the Mardi Gras protests began in Sydney, the Sydney Morning Herald was among the publications which published the names, the addresses, and the occupations of those people who had been arrested for protesting. Today, I mean, it would be absolutely aghast for a media company to do that. And these days, people might say that the Nine Media group of newspapers are more left-leaning. And again, I think it also depends on your perspective and what it is that you look for in a news organisation
Yeah.
and where you choose to get your information from.
Can I ask you though, like, how come? I mean, I sort of feel like we don't notice that. Like, COVID was one of the biggest things that I noticed, where when you turn the TV on, it was very catastrophized and very dramatic, right? So it sort of like was leading the mood. But with those smaller stories, do you think that the public just don't notice that they're being influenced like that, or do you think that we know now and we just go seeking the place where we're going to find news that agrees with us?
Well, you tend to flock to news media that you feel comfortable with, whether that's Channel 9 if you're still into linear television, analog television rather, if you're still into 10 o'clock. Channel 10, Channel 9, Channel 7, whatever. If you only ever buy the Herald Sun or the Daily Telegraph or the Courier Mail, if you're in cities which only have one newspaper, that's a bit of a problem. But, we all have an intimate bias about where we believe the news is best sourced from.
Mm.
And the best thing we can always do is read more widely. Now, and that's not just the publications, the newspapers that you agree with. It's also the newspapers that you don't agree with, because you should see what somebody else is arguing against your worldview. I think that's a very healthy thing.
Yeah. Okay.
But certainly we live in an environment where the media has changed absolutely again and again and again over the last 10 years. In one sense, it is shrinking. The outlets for news are shrinking. But then alternatively, people are getting their news from other sources. And there's been this
Yes.
huge global debate about Google and Facebook using mainstream media's content for their own advertising purposes. I've been saying this probably for at least 20, maybe even 30 years. The people in my immediate friendship group have not been watching the 6 o'clock news for decades. They might have grown up doing that with their parents, watching at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, if they chose the ABC. But as younger people, they're getting the news from other sources during the day. There are 24-hour news channels. Twitter is constantly alive with news. So the sources that we get our information from have broadened, absolutely. And again, you follow people on Twitter, for example, that tend to promote your view of the world and your opinion. So you're unlikely to get involved unless it's shared by somebody else, someone who has an opposing perspective. And I think that's extremely different from what I grew up with. It's just the sources have changed.
Yeah. So I asked you that question because I'm leading into the second question, which is there's a lot of anxiety about fake news. But I'm seeing it in my clinics. Like I'm talking about really young people, like really anxious. So how does someone navigate what they know they can believe or what they can feel? Would it be avoiding, like you said, like your friends all seek it from the places, like because I think the catastrophize or the worry news is creating now a ripple effect in mental health.
It's a very hard thing to do, but the best thing to do is turn it off. I used to be a huge consumer of radio news, television news. I would, if I was home during the day, I'd start with breakfast television. I'd watch the morning news. I'd be there in the afternoon for the afternoon bulletins on each of the channels. I'd be there at 7 o'clock at night watching at the ABC. And then in the old days, I'd be watching Late Line at night. So I was fully immersed in news. And part of that was my job. It came with the territory. Now, I find it quite easy to turn off the radio, to change channels. So move from, say, for example, ABC local radio. If I've heard too much about the local coverage of COVID, I might move to Radio National. If I've had too much of that there, I might go and listen to the BBC World Service. And then if I have all of those channels and then I'm completely full up with information, I just turn it off. But it's very hard, particularly when you're immersed in social media all day and you're constantly on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or Twitter or any of the other new technology that shares information. It is really addictive to be caught up in that because it's that Pavlov's dog situation. You find a trigger, it responds to you, you want to keep going, and then 2 hours later you're still in this endless loop. And if you're challenged by it, if you're finding it difficult to adjust to, do the hardest thing but the simplest thing and literally turn it off.
Yeah, I think that your point about marketing is really relevant. It's like, especially when you see certain like stories and they use the same word, like with the Meghan and Harry interview, for example, the word was bombshell. Every single news broadcast used the bombshell interview, right? So how do you feel about, what would you say to someone that decided to not connect with any media? Like, do you think that's a good thing for someone not to know any news?
Look, I think, yes,
I know,
it is.
It's hard because you're a media person.
Yeah, that's right. Look, it is hard, but I think you can be more selective about where you choose to get your information from.
Yeah.
And, Facebook and Twitter especially is full of bots retweeting fake news. And the fake news is made up by other bots which publish headlines and things that are out of context. I used to, in the last year, there used to be clickbait on Facebook, which would take screenshots of an ABC program as an example, and say, Michael Rowland was outraged against blah. And of course, you click on it, and it wasn't anything to do with that. It was just an opportunity to, get you to click on the link. Sometimes it's a little bit more malicious because it comes with spyware. But we're really sucked in very easily, but we've always been sucked in very easily by a headline. The headlines aren't going to go away, but it's how you choose to react to those things. And I might be one of the very few people in Australia, in fact, probably potentially in the world, who hasn't seen the Harry and Meghan interview.
I saw it for you because I saw it 4 times.
Oh, good. I have enormous empathy for him and his brother of what they've been through. I've had a similar situation. My mum died at 7. When I was 7, she acquired cancer, and she died very quickly. So I know what those boys are going through in the sense of their day-to-day lives, and how as you go through your life, your mum's not there for really important occasions, made enormously hard for both of them by being two young men in the global spotlight. And no matter what they do, people will always have an opinion. And sadly, for both of them, they're always going to be the target of news. It's just, sadly, they've just been born into a family that is part of that news cycle.
Yeah.
But it is really tough, and it must be very tough to grieve and mourn when you're in such a high profile position, in a circumstance where everyone in that thrall of royalty has an opinion about how you should be reacting to it.
Yeah. Well, the whole world does. And I was just wondering, again, this is an opinion for you because I know that it's such a big question. But do you think that the media is aware of their responsibility, how they impact people's mental health, or do they not care?
I think media are increasingly more conscious of it. I think credible journalists and media organisations certainly are aware of the triggers, and one of the things that I've been really happy to see the ABC do on broadcast or online is to provide links to Lifeline or Beyond Blue or other organisations that can provide help and assistance at the tail of a story that might have drawn problems or issues for the people who've consumed it. So I think that's a really good thing.
What about the other side, though? The other side meaning, and again, we don't know the truth because it's just all speculation, but say, for example, going back to Meghan and Harry, right? Like there was certain news agents and papers and all that that actually promoted all this really full-on stuff that creates, I don't know, like I even got upset reading it that one of the papers was calling their child, they compared it to a gorilla, right? So I'm more talking about that side of it, like editorially. Do they care? Will someone turn around and say, look, that title, that heading might trigger some people, so let's pull that story. I'm guessing that's going to be a no, isn't it?
Well, I think it depends on the publication and the management of the publication and the ownership of the publication and what they're willing to do to get a story out. But also their commercial organisations, their job is to sell a story.
Yeah.
And in order to sell a story, to be attractive to advertisers, they need to have, certain numbers of eyeballs watching on TV or listening to the radio or seeing it online or buying a newspaper. So a lot of that is just to generate sales so that they can in turn sell themselves to advertisers.
And your point then before was to make sense then. It's up to us to turn it off.
Absolutely, it's up to us to turn it off.
It makes sense now what you said. It is hard to turn it off.
Look, I was made to watch a television program which is ostensibly about people getting married to the love of their life.
Oh, love at first sight.
Married at first sight.
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't something that I would sign up for a second episode of. But what I found really intriguing behind all of that was at the end of the day, it was all about the nudge, nudge, wink, wink of have they had sex? Have they seen each other naked on commercial television? And of course, they're wanting to get us sucked in. But, if you really want to see people and know that they've had sex, you can look at all sorts of other websites to find that kind of thing. So I found it really interesting that it's commercially palatable to run a program like that. But the other point of that is, maybe 1.4 million Australians tuned in to watch it. Okay, so that's, and I'm been, one of these, I've my programs that I've worked on have lived or died because of their ratings. But for example, a program that might attract 1.4 million viewers for that night or whatever, just remember that there are 23 million other Australians who were not watching that program. So we tend to get caught up in the hype about highest rating programs and the most watched show forever, particularly on commercial television. But just remember, at least 23 million other Australians found something better to do.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And a lot of those people will have their television turned off.
Yeah, because I don't watch commercial television, and I feel like it's a bit dumb. It dumbs people down. It's a simpler version of life. But I have to admit, when I did by accident see that last season of that show, I got hooked. And like, so I really had to be conscious not to watch it again this year, because it's the formula. It's A, it's a distraction. B, it's attractive. C, it's the scandal, like you were saying, that curiosity. And the reality is that it's the same show every year. But
Yes.
it's just different characters. I'm thinking, oh my God, like, are we really that dumb? But we must be.
I think that, free-to-air television is free for a reason, because it's there to lock you into not essentially the content of that show, but there to lock you into advertisers to sell supermarkets and banks and department stores and, technology products, your eyeballs, so that you will be influenced to buy their products. And look, not surprisingly, more and more people around the world are tuning to streaming.
Yeah.
Netflix, Apple TV, Stan in Australia, Foxtel. People are going to places where they can download all of their episodes at once. They can binge watch. They can do that by paying a subscription fee, and they're not bothered by advertising.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest threat.
And they can also choose what they watch.
Of course.
Like
absolutely.
I love YouTube and just watch documentaries and all that, and it's free, and I love it. I just think, and I don't have to worry about all the commercial stuff. But
Yes.
I'm really mindful of time, because I could talk to you for hours. But have you got a bit more time for us?
Of course I do.
I really just wanted to ask you what you believe, being in the media and having exposure to all these different people and things. What do you think the modern male tragedy is at the moment? What are males going through that is hard for them? Because I think that there is a big evolution with men, and this is a men's mental health podcast. So what's your view on what men are going through at the moment?
I think broadly men are having a mirror held up to them and are being shown that the world is not entirely theirs. And that is a huge shock for many men of all ages, that this male superiority, which, I have to say we've probably all grown up with, where men make the decisions, the women do as they're told, women are not treated as equal citizens. We're living in a time, certainly in Australia at the moment, where women have had more than enough, and thankfully are rallying together to stand up for themselves. And
do you think they're listening? Like, for example, the Parliament.
I don't think enough people are listening. They're hearing, but they're not listening. And I just see what is happening at the moment in our national political field, and it appalls me that so many men have this entitlement decision making, that they are not fully immersed in women's rights and the advancement of women.
Some of the women are doing it too. Like, I was a bit appalled by the cover up, even with some of the senior members with the women. Like, so do you think that from this, because you're a political, or you can understand it from a media perspective, do you really think that all of this upheaval is going to demonstrate change?
I think that what will change is that a political party will suddenly upend itself and say, we need to be part of this moment, and if we are not part of this moment now, then we will be damned forever. And I don't know which political party is going to do that. All of the mainstream parties have a lot to learn about their engagement with their women, their treatment of women, their pre-selection of female candidates, not just for winnable seats, but just to have the opportunity to stand and run for a political life. This moment is extraordinary, and men should just step back and let them through.
Yeah.
I'm very
I know.
fortunate that I grew up as a son of a woman who was the victim of domestic violence, who had to give up her career when she was pregnant with me, because that was what was expected at the time, that my father wouldn't let her return to the workforce. So I understand. I've seen it from my own family, the destruction that a male perspective can bring. I'm shocked at 51 that we're still having this argument, and that women are still having to fight in such a way to be heard. Frankly, it disappoints me and it
Yeah.
shocks me, and we should all be doing more to advance women.
Yeah. I mean, funny, I was listening to ABC Radio this morning and they announced that the prediction of when equality in pay, the pay equality gap, they don't expect it to be actually finalized till 2027. And I'm
Yes.
thinking, oh my God, like there's more drama. Everyone's holding on to, like they were saying what you were saying, there's people that are aware, but they're not listening. So
Every
they're
time
saying, yeah, they're saying things that aren't real.
every time I read in a newspaper that an organisation has been caught out for underpaying women against what they pay men, it absolutely shocks and frightens me, because as an executive, as a decision maker who employed staff, there was never any sense in anything that I ever did that a female candidate would be paid less than a male candidate. Um, and it shocks me that that still exists. And not only does it still exist, it is encouraged.
Yeah.
And that terrible, terrible treatment of women that dismisses a young woman without giving her the opportunity to grow a career, because we won't bother investing in her because she's only going to leave and have kids. I mean, it still exists,
Yeah.
and it appalls me.
In the ABC report, funnily enough, the group that was lacking or falling behind the most were more women organizations. And I found that really funny because they thought that they were okay. But the reporter was saying that they also need to acknowledge that if they're a women's organization, they need to consider bringing men in. It needs to be more equal. So it's all about changing our beliefs and perspectives, not just thinking it's, women's rights. It's about both. And this will be the last question because I know that we've gone over. Is that so? Can we look at the other side of the coin? Like, why is it, do you think, that men still have no support if they're being abused? Like, for example, we've done some work on domestic violence, and if a woman rang the police, they would come, they would arrest the guy, they would do all the things to support the woman. But if a man rang up and said, "My wife's beating me up" or "My gay partner's beating me up," there's nothing. So why do you think we're at that place?
A domestic violence report should be treated as a domestic violence report, regardless of the gender of the people involved. I mean, that's just, I find that really shocking.
Yeah,
I think part of it is that we're not used to speaking about domestic violence against men, whether that's in same-sex relationships or whether it's in heterosexual relationships. But we all need to be mindful that anyone can find themselves in a situation where the power imbalance in that relationship has changed and they are under threat. And every police service in Australia should be treating that equally.
yeah, they
It
don't.
and there's, and which clearly shows there's a lot of work to be done to educate about domestic violence. But I would absolutely love to see more education around domestic violence, but we're still not doing enough for women who find themselves trapped, who are unable to leave their home, who can't get access to services or programs or shelter. And so they stay with the perpetrator, because if they left, they'd be sleeping on the street or in their car with their kids.
Yeah, and we know that the most common perpetrator for female murders is the partner. So it's like, yeah, we have all this information, but we're not acting fast enough. I think it is all that red tape. I do think that they know, but there's red tape that it's political. It's like money. It's all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting. And the thing about the men getting support is also a shame based thing. Like I think you're right. If we talk about it more, and we're starting to, then there's going to be more dialogue. Like there's a shame thing for imagine I can't even imagine a man ringing up to say that my wife's beating me up. You know what I mean? That he might feel that uncomfort, so we won't do it, or he may feel like the police will laugh. So I think again, the more that we talk about it, the more that will change. So
And as I said, I think we need to do much more around domestic violence education for all levels of government, for all levels of police services, because it is a problem in our community. And if we don't talk about it, it will only continue to be covered up. But in fact, we can resource multi-million-dollar companies through the COVID crisis, and allow them to keep the money that they've been allocated by the federal government, despite recording record profits on their balance sheets. But how about if some of that money was returned to the government and then was redistributed to domestic violence issues, for example? Wouldn't that be fantastic?
It'd be fantastic. And wouldn't it be fantastic if parents and role models around young children, young men, young boys can teach them to respect women? Like that's what
it starts at home.
I know, and it starts with really simple things like just saying, it's really interesting. Like, it starts with a mother or a father saying yes to the son and no to the girl. Yes, you can go play outside. No, stay. You're going to keep doing your dress. That mentality then starts to create a division of what boys and girls can do, and then bang. So it's really tricky for parents to actually even consider that could be a problem. But it is. It's like as soon as a girl gets told no, she's already told there's a difference.
Girls can do anything. Unfortunately, they're not always allowed to. And that's what we need to change.
Yeah. Andrew, I'm going to let you go. I'm really sorry that I made you talk over. I'm sorry that we didn't get to talk about your achievements and all the great things that you've done, but maybe we can get you back on somewhere down the track. But can I just say that today's podcast has been so insightful, and it's so good to talk about these things so openly, because I think this is going to allow other listeners to do the same thing, either on our platform or at home or with their friends. So thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
You've been listening to the Secret Men's Business podcast. So don't forget, podcast is out Monday and on Thursday at 9 a.m. So don't hit the subscribe button. And anything that you want to know about Andrew's information will be linked to this podcast on all our platforms. All right, guys, have a great week and we'll see you soon. Bye.